Welcome back to today's episode. We're talking about Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. It's a new animated television series developed by Bryan Lee O'Malley and BenDavid Grabinski for Netflix. 8 episodes. The series is based off the Scott Pilgrim graphic novel written and drawn by O'Malley, with the entire main cast from the 2010 film adaptation Scott Pilgrim vs. the World reprising their roles while also serving as both a sequel and remake of the graphic novel and film. I'm done with the Wikipedia spiel. I want to kick this episode off with a little bit of a game. It's called It's Been a While. All right,
okay.
And so it's either true or false. And
is it just about Scott Pilgrim, or is it about
You'll
stuff?
see. You'll
Okay,
see.
all right.
It's been a while since August of 2010 when the film adaptation Scott Pilgrim vs. the World graced U.S. theaters. Back then, it competed with movies such as The Expendables, Despicable Me, and Toy Story 3. True or false?
Oh, okay. Well, I know it was August 2010 because my first week of 6th grade, as a reward, my dad bought me to the theater to see Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Toy Story 3.
So you'd seen the marketing and you were really into it.
And I know
were a lot of your friends at that time?
No, I think it was a box office bomb.
It was a
right?
box office bomb.
And actually, the friends that I went to go see Godzilla with years later, about a year of 2011, I rented Scott Pilgrim vs. the World from Blockbuster, and I sat them down and I made them watch it because they love video game movies so much, and I really liked the film. You were saying Expendables, Toy Story 3, Despicable Me. Okay, I know Toy Story 3 came out.
You trying to date it?
Yeah, because I think it was like July of 2010. Expendables, I don't know. I'm just going to go with true.
That is true.
Yeah.
Yes, Expendables was number 1 for that week. I think it was August 13th. It's been a while, 15 years in fact, since casting went out for the group of talented actors who went on to play Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, those characters, and play a bunch of teen/20-somethings. It's been so long, in fact, that the returning main cast, the oldest is now 43, Jason Schwartzman, while the youngest is Michael Cera at 35.
Okay, so I know that Michael Cera was like 20 when he made the movie. I want to say true, and if you've seen Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, you know there's like no old people in that film whatsoever. Even the extras are all really young, so it is strange how, they're older now, but I'm going to go with true.
Not only that, Edgar Wright, I think, dated Anna Kendrick after the movie, which is just, even the director was young at the time. So that's actually false.
Okay, is it Chris Evans is actually the oldest or something like that?
It's not Chris Evans, it's actually Brandon Ruth, I think, and he's like 44, 45, and then Brie Larson is actually 34. She's only 34.
Wow.
That's insane. Because she was in the league, and so she must have been in her early 20s for that as well. All right. It's been a while since the movie's release. Mary Elizabeth Winstead has been married twice since then. Currently, she's married to Ewan McGregor.
Okay, I know that she was married once. I'll say true again, just because I think that has to be true,
It is true. Yeah. It's interesting, though, because she was in the Ahsoka series, the most recent thing that we've...
really?
Yes, she played...
You're right. No, of course.
Yes.
Yeah, because I've watched episodes since then.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, so she's connected to the Star Wars universe in more ways than one. All right, it's been a while since director Edgar Wright became involved. In fact, at the time that he started his work on this production, he was attached to write and direct the live action movie Ant-Man.
Wow. I'm gonna go with false. I never heard anything like that.
This is true, and I actually learned about it because I went to his 2010 Wikipedia page. I used the Wayback Machine to look at what he was known for, and it's basically a lot of Simon Pegg work.
Obviously. Simon Pegg isn't even in this.
But at the time it was like he is best known for working with Simon Pegg. That's changed for today. But yeah, he was really into the idea of joining Marvel and doing his own Ant-Man style movie, but Marvel was not into doing that with an Edgar Wright style movie. Does that make sense?
I wonder if they would change that today. I feel like they would have to almost with such crazy series like Loki and everything else.
He was attached up until I think the first Ant-Man came out. He was dropped during that time, and he was already kind of in the Baby Driver mode at that point, right?
Yeah.
And Baby Driver is your favorite movie of his, yeah?
It's one of my favorite movies.
Or is it Scott Pilgrim?
No, Baby Driver definitely beats Scott Pilgrim, but they're both completely separate. And I always have a soft spot for Scott Pilgrim just because it did come out so long ago and how nostalgic it is and how the whole cast, I was so glad that they all came back. But every single one of them is way bigger than they were back then. Like Chris Evans, so much bigger. Kieran Culkin, Succession, Brie Larson, Captain Marvel. You can even make a case for Michael Cera just because
it's like Wet Hot
famous.
American Summer. When they brought back a lot of that cast, they had all like gone on to do amazing, crazy things. A lot of them were famous comedians by that point. But this, it was like they were able to cherry pick people who are going to become famous, like you're saying. Brandon Routh, I think, probably has the smallest career since then because he was already Superman by that time.
Yeah, I think that he's the only actor.
But he's still done a lot, like Legends of Tomorrow,
Right.
and then like that's his main claim to fame, I think, since then. But he was also in Chuck at the time. It's been a while since Bryan Lee O'Malley released the first issue of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World in 2004, because at that time, Chris Evans hadn't even been cast for the Fantastic Four yet.
Okay, so I did read actually the first issue of Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
And that will help you with this answer.
Just yesterday.
Oh, really?
So yeah, I'm going to go with false.
That's
Is that false?
Yeah, no. You're right. It is false because he would have already been cast. It came out in 2005.
Right.
Yes. All right. It's been a while since Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. The game, which came out in 2010 as well, that was the video game. When the movie became a cult hit, which happened pretty soon after the movie was released, but also bombed at the office. That's where that's when it became a video game, and it was against competing games, downloadable games like Plants vs Zombies, Dead Rising 2, and Limbo.
True. I guess,
that is true. Yeah, Plants vs Zombies, 2010. All right, so that's the end of the game. I hope we all learned something. But I haven't read the comics. I have seen the movie. I'm definitely not as big a fan as a lot of people that I'm hearing about from other reviews.
What would you give the movie out of 10?
I thought it was perfectly acceptable. I understand that at the time it was pretty cool, but it reminded me a lot of the 1960s Batman, where there would be words that came out that were like wham, bam, and then everybody gave it a ton of credit because it was mixing the comic book style with that.
Well, it's like a transmedia narrative or something.
Yeah, it was
like
a genre-bending film. I give it credit for all that. It just didn't, I guess, spark me in a way where I was like, oh, this is a really engaging plot. It seemed to be that there was a guy who was just randomly coming across a bunch of his girlfriend's exes, having to defeat them in some way, and then ending the whole thing in a band battle, which for the late 2010s or late 20,000s. 20,000. Oh my God. Okay. It just seemed like every movie that was a kid's movie ended with some sort of band battle, like a guitar riff type thing, And I didn't know that Michael Cera actually had to dumb down his skills to play the bass with the rest of the band.
Oh,
he was the only one who could actually play. Everybody else learned from scratch. So he had to make his skills look worse.
For Sex Bomb.
Yes.
That's the name of the band.
I thought that was a character. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
So, yeah, if you haven't seen the movie, the first episode follows pretty close to that, and the movie follows pretty close to at least the first issue of the graphic novel or comic book series, where we have Scott Pilgrim. He's 23. He's dating Knives. He's a guitarist for Sex Bomb, and that consists of Kim, Steven, and Steven Sills. And then Scott meets Ramona Flowers, the girl of his dreams.
And Ramona is Mary Elizabeth Winstead,
yes.
And she is supposed to be bigger in this series. Yeah.
Yeah, no, she's the main character. It actually is a lot like Clone High, the revamp series, where if you remember in season 2, they focused more on Joan's story arc, and then in the original Clone High, they focused more on Abe's story arc, kind of like the movie focused more on Scott Pilgrim.
People compared it to Masters of the Universe, where everybody thought He-Man was going to be the main character, and then after that first episode, actually the first 10 minutes, right? Then the other
almost completely, because the first episode of Scott Pilgrim, I was actually getting annoyed with how closely related to the film that it was, because it didn't seem like there was anything that was different.
Except the animation style.
Well, yeah, the animation obviously, but we get scenes from the film that were just animated.
So it's
the show.
What If, where I was getting mad because it seemed like directors were trying to cash in on just elements that they were able to transpose.
Right, down to Scott Pilgrim at a party drawing not even Ramona's eyes or her nose or her mouth, just the hair, and then going up to someone and being like, who is this? And then Julie Powers being like, I forbid you to date Ramona Flowers. And then even though he decides to kind of dive past that and still goes for Ramona. And it's the same exact 20 minutes from the film that you see in the series, up until Matthew Patel, the ex-boyfriend, comes crashing in right as Sex Bomb is going to have their first performance. And then I was like, okay, is this really just going to be the whole series? I was actually actually starting to hate it a little bit just because of how closely related it was. And then Scott Pilgrim dies at the very end of the first episode, and Matthew Patel is like, I won? And that's when I felt really dumb, because obviously the series had I had fallen for its trap.
It pulled the rug out.
It had been trying to copy the first movie up until the very ending scene, and for that I would give the first episode like a 7 out of 10, because it was very much a surprise, and it made me want to see the rest of the series as well. And that's kind of when we get with what you're talking about, Ramona Flowers, that's also a pro for this show, her being the character that they decided to focus on.
Did any part of you think, well, Scott can't actually be dead, he'll be back in the second episode?
Yes, well, I thought that he was going to return way sooner than he actually did, because at the very end of the second episode we learned that Scott actually didn't die. He falls through a portal right as he is about to fight Matthew Patel, and we don't know who exactly opened up the portal, but much like in the movie, when someone dies, per se, there's actually coins that fall, and it's supposed to be like those arcade video games.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Ramona Flowers, definitely, I enjoyed following kind of, because throughout episodes 4 through 6, mostly, she's trying to figure out who exactly opened up this portal.
So she still likes Scott enough at this point where she's learned enough about him. Like, they've connected enough that she would want to do this for him?
That was the weird thing about the show, and they even try to, they call to it to try and explain it. It doesn't make a lot of sense, because she only knows Scott for, like, one time that they hung out. In fact, a lot like in the movie, he's ordering off of Netflix, trying to wait for DVDs to come in, because he knows
this was something I have to ask you about. So in the original, she was an Amazon box deliverer, but the thing is, that still is very common today to see people delivering stuff on Amazon. Why did they like go back in time? It would make more sense if she in the 2010 movie was a Netflix deliverer or something like that, and then now, because they no longer sell DVDs.
Well, I mean, it's on Netflix, so that's the reason why they decided to change it to that.
Does this take place in the modern day?
I would, I think so.
Do people have cell phones?
Yeah.
They have like smartphones and stuff? All right. Yeah. So I'm a little baffled by that. Yeah.
Well,
because they made such a big deal about it in the interviews and stuff, how they changed her job. But it doesn't make sense as to why, unless it's taking place in the past and they just want to date it, that she would be delivering discs as opposed to an Amazon driver.
Well, they never go back to it. It was just there for that.
It was a one-off joke. I get it. And they're very meta in this show, right?
Yeah, they're even making a movie in episode 5 by young Neil, who I like more in this series. He was my favorite character more than I did in the film.
He's a stoner, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, he's supposed to be a stoner. He wakes up and he sees that there's this script that's been ran for him. He thinks that he writes it, and then they decide to make a movie where they get Lucas Lee, Chris Evans' character. It seems like he was the boyfriend they focused on the most, probably because he was the biggest names. Like, Chris Evans doesn't do a lot of TV. I can only think of Defending Jacobs, and then even on top of that, he doesn't do a lot of like animated series either.
Yeah, I haven't heard his voice in a ton. In fact, I don't even know if he showed up in What If. Like, I don't.
Yeah, no, they didn't. They actually weren't. But that was
that was because of what happened to his character in the Marvel, and it would have been kind of cheap to immediately come in after Endgame and be like, oh, he returned. But yeah, so you're telling me that the show is no longer concentrating on Scott's world. It's more about. It's still called Scott Takes Off, though, right?
Yes, that was probably my biggest con with the show. Scott Pilgrim is only in about a quarter of this series, 3 episodes, if we're being honest. And the first episode is just again the movie, so it's nothing new.
It's not like Takes Off in a rocket. It's like he's out of it.
Yeah, that's how I actually took the title.
All right, so Ramona then is leading the series. She's leading the mystery, and she's also hanging out with Chris Evans. Why are there people in the past? Why do I keep seeing people cast for like young Scott and old Scott?
Yeah,
and stuff
well,
like that comes along later.
Yeah, that comes along later.
Sorry to jump ahead.
But the series is completely separate from the graphic novel and the film after the first episode. Goes in an entirely separate direction. For example, Gideon is the big bad in Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
Yes,
like in the film. In the second episode, he loses the League of X's, or being the head of the League of X's, because Matthew Patel, the person who supposedly killed Scott Pilgrim, ends up taking over in a fight. So I was really enjoying the different changes that they were making, and that's really...
Are they all still trying to get with Ramona? Like, is that their ending mission? Or
no,
what?
And that's I think a fault of the show, because it didn't really make a lot of sense why we were focusing so much on the boyfriend's characters, because the only reason that they were showing up was because Ramona was maybe thinking that one of them opened up the portal, and by the end it's not even one of the boyfriends that opens up the portals, it's the older Scott, as you were talking about, voiced by Will Forte, and I think that that's supposed to be the Scott...
It's like a Flash scenario, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it was supposed to be the Scott Pilgrim from the movie, because Will Forte ends up making Scott fall through the hole because he doesn't want him to get together with Ramona like it happens in the film. Because
that was a duplicate ending. Yeah,
because
they shot like two, right?
I know, the alternate thing. But in the actual theatrical cut, they get together, and old Scott Pilgrim, got together with Ramona, had a great life, married her, and then 12 years later they ended up separating, and that destroyed him because he ended up defeating all of the ex-boyfriends.
Spider-Man from Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
So he's trying to make it so that the young Scott Pilgrim doesn't end up dating the Ramona Flowers.
That would have been a really messed up thing for Jake Johnson to do. If he had come back through that portal to teach Miles and he was like, you know what, it just does not work out with you. And yeah.
Well, but here it was so strange because it was like they were taking the main character from the original film and they were making him evil.
Well, a lot of people have said that the main character from the original film is the worst character from the original
film.
Pilgrim? Scott Pilgrim has gotten a lot of blowback by the way that he was, like his actions. Like he was a bit of a dick and like some of the things he would do. And they even poke fun at it here, right? Like they poke fun at the fact that he was dating a teen when he was in his mid-20s
and it's the same way that it's the same way that is in the comic book Knives Chow. And in much like the film, in episode 7, when Scott Pilgrim ends up coming back and is explaining the whole story, he ends up telling Knives, I'm sorry that I was dating you, I probably shouldn't have been, and I was also looking at Ramona Flowers.
If only Andy had done that in The Office. That episode is still funny, just not in the way you'd think.
I'm surprised, though, that Scott Pilgrim, in the Scott Pilgrim versus the World movie, is not liked, though.
It's not that the movie's not liked. It's just that his character has kind of been like, oh, why are we engaging in some of these tropes? If you want to look at outside of his character, you can say, well, the angry lesbian trope. And so they tried to fix that as well.
So that maybe explains the finale of this series because through things that happen in the TV show, there's this musical number, there's this play that is going to be about Scott Pilgrim's life, and Gideon, still being somewhat evil because he wants to take back the League of Exes, ends up blowing the theater up.
Yes.
And they all go into the dream world that Scott was stuck in, and then the Scott Pilgrim from the movie, I keep saying he's from the movie, I'm not actually sure if it's 100% that, but Will Forte's Scott Pilgrim.
You know who plays the younger version of Scott Pilgrim?
No.
That's Finn Wolfhard.
I didn't even recognize his voice.
Yeah, the guy from Stranger Things.
Yeah, but at the very end, Will Forte, Scott Pilgrim, all of the League of Exes, including Ramona. Old Ramona is there as well because she ended up helping Scott get back to the real world. They all team up. It was almost like Avengers: Age of Ultron or Thanos or something like that. And they end up taking out the evil Scott Pilgrim, and that's how the series ends. Overall, I think that the animation for this show was great. The fact that they were able to bring back all the main characters from the show.
That's what everybody's talking about. And it's funny because it's not only the main characters who are voicing these characters, they also, because they used an actual anime production studio, had like a full Japanese cast come in there and do the same exact voices.
This is actual anime. I wasn't sure if it was just supposed to be kind of poking an homage at it, but when you get to like episode 4, you're like, no, this is straight up when you're seeing Lucas Lee use his skateboard.
If you know anything about Bryan Lee O'Malley, when he first started this whole project, when he was like in his early 20s and he made Scott Pilgrim, he was heavily influenced. He wanted to do the shōnen anime with the big eyes and stuff. And it's weird because if you see these characters with the way that they're drawn, and then you look at the movie poster, it makes the human version look so messed up because Michael Cera and Mary Elizabeth Winstead's eyes are so tiny.
Yes.
It makes it look like they need bigger eyes for the poster of their own movie.
And I'm glad you robbed the comic book because, yes, it's like the comic book come to life. These are the same characters. They're the same type of design. I really liked how they looked.
And Science Saru, the production company that made it again, they have done other things that we've reviewed, like Adventure Time. They also did Devilman Crybaby, Space Dandy, Japan Sinks. So they're a legit, like, production quality firm or whatever you want to call it.
I also like how the show decided to go a separate way. This is a show that's treated with a lot of care. It's very much for the fans who kind of want to see more lore.
Less so than for newbies who are coming in.
Yeah, so this is very much in the same vein of like that 90s show and iCarly reboot where it's like the people that are going to be watching this are the people who really like the original series. Sure, you can watch it as a newcomer, but you're not going to understand why the jokes and why all the references and callbacks callbacks are the way they are.
I also like that O'Malley was very upfront, maybe not in the trailers, but like when he was talking about it and why they keep changing Scott Pilgrim from the original comics to the movie to now. It's because if he still had to make the same stuff, if he was still writing from that perspective of that original character, he would be dead inside. And that reminded me a lot of the guy who originally created Adventure Time, how he had to butt out after a few seasons because he just could not deal with these characters that he created.
And I think that's the reason why the first episode is the way it is. That's why they decided to make it exactly like the movie, and then they're like, no, we're going to go completely separate and focus on different characters. You get a lot more reasonings for why the X's are the way they are, and that way it's very strange. It
provides depth and grounds them.
Because it's like the Fatal Attraction TV series, where if you remember when we watched the movie, they said that the character is one way, and then when we watch the series, it's exactly the opposite.
A lot of shows get bashed because they are called too woke, or that because they're focusing more on like other characters, they're getting rid of the main character. But it sounds like these are all positives in this instance because of how it ends up.
Yes, and the show never took itself too seriously. There's not a lot of like dramatic heft moments that a lot of series try to do. I would still say that like things like Fiona and Cake and Scavenger's Reign, they have emotional depth, and those series are probably better than something like this. But also, this is meant to be binged and just watched. You're not meant to really think about it that much. If I did have to bring up some cons with the show, it's that in the second episode when they have the League of Exes boyfriends thing, you see all the exes interact with each other. That was really fun to watch, but they only do that once. And seeing
you wanted to see it more.
I wanted to see, because you do get Gideon and Lucas Lee in like episode
8 episodes.
4.
Why don't we see that every episode? I hear there's a lot of fight scenes, almost too many fight scenes.
Too many fight scenes?
I don't know.
I mean,
it's up to you.
You get Lucas Lee like kind of battling the paparazzi ninjas when he's on set with the skateboard, and then there's always sometimes 2 characters, and then the narrator coming in being like this character versus this character. But I didn't think that the fight scenes were too many. I just felt like the show, surprisingly enough, I didn't think this would be a con, goes at a very slow pace. I've already mentioned how Scott Pilgrim doesn't show up until the very end of the 6th episode, even though we know that he's still alive by the end of the 2nd one. Yeah. But also, whenever you have Ramona and she's going around just kind of interviewing all of her different exes, yes, it's cool to hear the voice, but this plot isn't actually moving. And then it turns out that by episode 7, it just ended up being old Scott, which it seems like it's almost a predictable twist if you were to really think about it. And so the pacing actually was one of the biggest problems with the show.
Is that the only one?
The only big one, another con I have is that they try to intersplice songs into the show.
Well, that was their whole deal. I mean, you're right. This is just executively produced by him, but yeah.
But the songs are as bad as the Pinocchio film whenever they tried to do
so not
songs.
All the songs were great.
No, I thought that none of the songs worked.
Did you like the original soundtrack from?
Yes.
Because they brought some of those back.
So, some of the songs from that?
Yes.
Okay. I didn't actually catch that, but I thought that just the songs didn't work. So overall, I thought that the show is definitely a positive. If you like Scott Pilgrim, that would be the people I recommend.
What are you giving it?
I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10.
7 out of 10 is an 8 out of 10 on IMDb. It seems like it's gotten mostly generally positive feedback. The audience also seems to like it because most of the audience is made up of people who originally liked the show. The main criticism is, yes, Scott Pilgrim isn't in most of the show. When comparing to, because we're coming up to the end of the year where we're going to do our show that just like reviews the best of like our favorite TV shows and our favorite TV episodes, I just wanted to run through our other animated series and see where this would probably like fall, right?
Great, yeah. Okay.
So you can just say above or below when I go through these, right?
It's going to be way above Velma.
I was going to start with Velma.
No chance. Way above Velma.
Velma, Agent Elvis.
I would say it inches out Agent Elvis.
And you should also mention if the animation quality is like distinctly better or worse. I think that
with Agent Elvis, the animation was better, but I also think there was more episodes to it, and it probably, if I had to guess, and I'm not sure, had a higher budget.
Though. I think this had a huge budget.
Really?
Honestly, because they had 2 voice casts. They brought in a full animation studio. I think it had a pretty big budget. Then Royal Crackers.
Yeah, way better than Royal Crackers.
Unicorn Warriors Eternal, also big eyes.
No, the animation is not better, and I think the story is better. So I would probably... Oh, you can keep
better in Unicorn Warriors Eternal?
Unicorn Warriors Eternal beats this.
Okay, Clone High.
Clone High, yes, it is.
Yeah, what do you mean, yes, it is?
Above. You said above or below. It's above.
Okay,
yes.
Clone High. Sorry, Futurama.
Futurama, yeah, above.
Captain Fall. Captain Fall.
Above, yeah.
My Adventures with Superman?
They're both anime, right? Because I think
Yes.
My Adventures Superman had it. So I think
true.
that the animation is maybe on the same level.
Solar
but I would say
Opposites.
above. Solar Opposites, above that as well.
Fiona and Cake.
Yeah, that's below.
Captain Laserhawk. That's an interesting one,
Captain
right?
Laserhawk.
Because that also kind of genre melded and brought in like weird mesh of I forgot what the guy's name was, but that guy's the weird person.
But yeah,
the one who makes the R trailers.
It's also like you said, it's very meta. It also took in all those video games. I would actually say that maybe they're tied.
And Scavenger Rain.
Yeah, they're below.
Okay. Thanks for listening. Unless you have anything else you want to add.
No, that's about it.
We'll see you on the next one. Bye.
Bye.